The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is Lunch and Learn. It is Friday, April 3rd, and we have a special guest speaker today, Dr. Nicole Cunningham. She prefers not to have the term doctor used, so I'm going to let Nicole give some background about herself. She'll be talking today about homeopathic medicine and some of its values and dealing with the current COVID-19 virus situation. So, Nicole, thank you so much. With everything going on in this country, we so much appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to speak with our group. This is a great group of people. Thank you for joining us, and I'm turning it over to you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm Australian, so I will try and talk slower than normal. We have a bit of a reputation for being fast, and I'm aware that there may be a little bit of a challenge with the accent. I've been a homeopath for 17 years. I've had a global practice that's been exclusively online for the last 11 years. And this COVID-19 is a real opportunity for homeopathic medicine to be in the spotlight. So it's a pleasure to share today. I wanted to talk about homeopathic medicine, its link with epigenetics and also epidemic diseases. Because you are all neurofeedback practitioners, which I absolutely love and have used, it's wonderful to speak to a group of people like yourselves who understand frequency and vibrational medicines. And there's a great alignment between homeopathic medicine and its use on a vibrational scale, which is a big part of how we use homeopathy in epidemic disease treatment. I did my my doctorate in Melbourne, and I did my postgrad in a homeopathic hospital in India before I started my practice 17 years ago. So I've worked a lot in the Western world, but I've been fortunate enough to have an exposure in mass epidemics in India, both when I was working in the homeopathic hospital, and also I had a homeopathic charity in West Bengal that I set up for 11 years over there, where we treated a lot of typhoid, a lot of cholera, and we had a lot of dysentery outbreaks as well. So I've had experience out in the field, and it's really interesting to see how the Eastern world is coping with this epidemic versus the Western world, because I promise you, when there is a typhus outbreak and you are out in the middle of rice fields, you do not have masks and gowns and medical equipment and ambulances. You have arsenic contaminated water, you have a kit of homeopathic medicine, and you have a line of 400 people in front of you who are suffering. So I hope to draw on that experience and show you some clinical application, and then also bring it into the now as to what it is that you can offer your family, your friends, and potentially your practice as well. So let me just move through the slides. So homeopathic medicine, for those who are unfamiliar, it's a medical system that was developed by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann over 200 years ago. He was a German physician and scientist. He actually worked as a chemist, and he was disillusioned with the medicine that was used at the time. It was back in the time where bloodletting, and they would use, was a big practice. They would use a lot of crude substances as medicine, arsenic, a lot of the heavy metals, and a lot of very aggressive treatment. And he started to play around with the idea of diluting those crude substances to see if he could get a better result. And this was the first time that he started to do his research, which in homeopathic medicine we call provings, whereby a potentized medicine is given to a group of healthy volunteers, and as a result, their symptoms that are experienced become our research. So he then created the beginning of what we call our materia medica, which is our list of medicines, how they can be applied, and what symptoms they can be used to treat and to cure. And the first proving that he did, he used the remedy cinchona, which is Peruvian bark, and he used it for the treatment of malaria. And as the documentation relays the story, he had a hospital ward with people that were suffering from malaria. He chose one side of the room. He diluted and succussed, which means he reduced the Peruvian bark down into a potentized diluted substance, and he gave it to one half of the room. And in doing so, that half of the room survived while the other perished. And this was the beginning of the first provings in the homeopathic research, specifically being used to treat epidemic diseases. Homeopathic medicine is based on a few laws that are very different to allopathic. To be familiar with the idea that like cures like. So unlike a pharmaceutical law of medicine, which we will use antivirals, we use antibacterials to treat a pathogen or contaminant, we will use the principle of like cures like. So the idea with that is that the symptoms that it will cure in a healthy patient are the same symptoms that will be eliminated in an unwell patient. And the real life examples that we see of this is practical applications of the remedy Allium cepa, which is made from the onion. You know, when you're making, chopping up onions in the kitchen, you'll experience symptoms such as burning in the eyes, coryza, drippy nose, a tickly cough, perhaps burning in the throat, the eyes and the nose. And Allium cepa in diluted medicinal homeopathic potency is used to treat those same symptoms that look like the ailment of hay fever in an unhealthy individual. So if you make a homeopathic potentized medicine with onion, which we call clinically Allium cepa, it can be used to reduce the symptoms of hay fever for people who suffer. Similarly, the homeopathic remedy Apis is actually made from crushed down bees. And that bee is then diluted and succussed, turned into a potentized or vibrational medicine instead of its original crude substance, which was the bee. And that homeopathic remedy Apis treats bee stings and inflammation of the skin. The second homeopathic law to know about is the law of minimum dose. And this was one that Hahnemann discovered through his disillusion with the medicine that was being used at the time. He found that when he was giving the crude substance to patients, they would die. When he diluted and succussed the process of agitating a remedy, the provings say that he bashed the homeopathic medicine onto a Bible 30 times to create the first dilution. And that was the first time that homeopathic medicine was created, which is a vibrational frequency. So that's a really important distinction to draw between naturopathic and homeopathic medicine. Naturopathic medicine uses crude substance in the forms of herbs and minerals and supplements. Homeopathic medicine uses a vibrational medicine. The advantage of this, of course, is that it can be used to treat the entire being, the whole person in its entirety, not just cellular change, which means that homeopathic medicine can be used to treat the emotions, the mind and the psychology, as well as vibrational misalignment. So that process of minimum dose is the idea that a homeopath will prescribe the least amount of the medicine to create a remedy response. So we're not measuring things in mils or IUs. We're instead working in potency, which is vibrational and frequency medicine. The next thing to know about is that we treat the totality of the symptoms, the person in its entirety, which is one of the things that I celebrate most in terms of my practice, is that when somebody comes to me with an ailment, I'm looking for that person as a whole. I'm going to homeopathic medicine that treats that person as a whole. So we see the person as one organism. We don't see that the liver is disassociated, or that the pain in the knee or the poor sleep are unrelated. We treat that person in their totality. And this is important when we're looking at COVID symptoms because every person is exhibiting those symptoms uniquely in their own way, which means that there is a few different remedies that are being used for treatment at this time. In terms of its application to epidemics, what's important to note is that we're actually prescribing based on the symptom patterns on the patient and not based on the name of the bug. So this is important, particularly if there are causing looking for a remedy that most the symptom totality. And we find that in Hahnemann's provings, in his Materia Medicus, and these are books that we used and drawn upon for the last 200 years and was the foundation of this medicine. So none of this application is new. And just as a side note, for the last 4 months, as this epidemic started to really start showing itself globally, there were secret and hidden meetings that were happening in Facebook groups and webinars of homeopathic doctors all around the world, and I was very lucky to get an invitation. And we started to begin to play around with which could be the remedy Epidemicus, which is the remedy that would be mostly aligned to this particular epidemic as it was coming out and starting to emerge itself. And this is something that happens every single year. You can actually take a homeopathic nosode, a homeoprophylaxis, to the flu for protection on a homeopathic level to treat an epidemic every year, as opposed to taking the inoculation of the flu vax every year. So this is something that homeopaths have done for many, many years. They collectively draw upon cases, looking at the symptom totality and the symptom patterns of their patients, and then collating that data, doing the research and aligning it with the provings and the homeopathic materia medicas that have the 200-year history. So as this started to really emerge, there was already a lot of discussion, a lot of buzz in these webinars and in these secret groups that were being done behind Facebook and things like that, so that a lot of homeopaths were already in the front line and starting to do the prevention, which is called homeopathic prophylaxis or homeoprophylaxis. So how does homeopathic medicine work? Homeopathy, unfortunately, receives a lot of criticism. If you put, does homeopathy work in Google, you come up with a lot of negative stuff. There's a lot of skeptics that say it's a vibrational medicine. There's no crude substance. If we put a homeopathic medicine underneath a microscope, there's nothing there. All we see is water. And it's such a pleasure to speak to a group of people like you who understand frequency and vibration, because hopefully there'll be a lot more open-mindedness as I share this with you. Hahnemann discovered at the same time as playing around with these provings that the idea that the body had a vitality, it had an innate ability to heal itself. In Chinese medicine, they call that qi or qi. In homeopathic medicine, we call it the vital force. And he's written extensively, as have many, many other homeopathic scholars over the last 200 years, spoken and written down their evidence, their clinical evidence, of how when you give the homeopathic remedy that is the most similar to the totality of the patient's symptoms, which we call the simillimum, the vital force is activated. And he said that that's the only thing that is required by a homeopathic physician, is to activate design in our biochemistry that says that when this vital force is activated, it will begin to heal itself. And that's continued to prove itself over my 17 years of clinical application of homeopathic medicine, because if the vital force is active, the resolution is innate. This can be drawn in a parallel to this epidemic right now, in the idea that if your immune system is strong, you will have the basic building blocks for your immune system to overcome the symptoms of COVID-19. So we just talk about it with different, talking about the basis and how the immune system works, and it's very, very relative. But this is a vibrational application when we talk about homeopathy. It's the idea that there's an energy within our body that must be activated in order for us to actually heal ourselves. The other thing that homeopathic medicine does that's really important is it works on a body's priority system. When I first treat a patient, I take the totality of symptoms and you give a remedy to a patient, you never really know where that remedy is going to go. You might have a patient that comes to you in my clinic, they'll come and they want to get pregnant and they have fertility remedy will go straight to that fungal toenail, because that will be the obstacle of cure. And it's not until that fungal toenail resolves that then I'll be able to successfully help that mother conceive. And this uses the system of Herring's law of cure that you may or may not be familiar with. The idea is that the body heals from in to out and from up to down. And this is an important application for homeopathic doctors, because we can trace whether the homeopathic medicine is expressing and moving in the correct direction of cure, or whether we are just suppressing symptoms and just keeping people comfortable. Allopathic medicine, of course, is the biggest suppressant of medicine that we know. We will suppress the body, we will put steroids on a rash, we will give steroids to somebody who has asthma instead of looking at the underneath causation of those symptoms. And pharmaceutical and allopathic medicine causes systemic toxicity, and it creates a lot of congestion in the vital force. So a lot of the work that we have to do as homeopaths when we see patients and they come to us with chronic diseases is we have to reverse this Hering's law of cure, activate the vital force, and enable the body to start healing itself, which is in direct opposition to the treatment they've been receiving with pharmaceutical medicine. And this is why many times, in many instances with chronic disease, allopathic medicine will only ever suppress or palliate. They will never experience cure. Whereas because of this Hering's law of cure, we will eventually get that patient to being completely asymptomatic and resolution of those chronic diseases because Hering's law of cure was activated and the vital force healed the patient. So homeopathic medicine has got a lot of research within the provings that I've already discussed. It also has a lot of evidence in quantum physics application and water memory. Masaru Emoto has done a lot of the groundbreaking research when it comes to water memory. You may or may not be familiar with him. He's a Japanese scientist, and he collected samples of water from all around the world. He took photos of them. He then created positive intention and changed the vibration around those water molecules, and he saw the crystals in them change. So you'll notice here on this slide that when this was a water sample that was taken, this is a photograph that was taken when the words "I will kill you" were said over the water molecule. Similarly with "thank you," when they spoke the word "thank you," the water crystal changed, the molecular structure changed. And so this is proof that water has memory because our body is so much made from water, around 70 to 86%, depending on the person and the age. You will have different applications of how vibrationally sensitive and the vibrational alignment of that patient. Because homeopathic medicines are stored in water, the vehicle of exchange is through water, this same law applies. The idea that a homeopathic medicine that of the crude substance, it's diluted many, many times for it to become a vibrational medicine. It's then succussed, which is the process of the storage of the molecular information. It's then bound into the water molecule. It's then taken orally onto the tongue or under the tongue by the patient, and it goes straight to the limbic system and is then dispersed energetically throughout the body. So it's been great to be able to draw on Masaru Emoto's work to show the validity of water memory, vibrational medicine, and its application to homeopathy. And I'd encourage you, if you're not aware of his research and all of his amazing photography, definitely to follow that up, because it really helps for people to understand and conceptualize, because there's something visual about frequency medicine. So homeopathic medicine can be used by everybody, children, newborns, pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers, the elderly, immunocompromised, and also those who are taking pharmaceutical medicines. This is a great advantage for homeopathic medicine that naturopathic and Chinese medicine do not have. Because we work on frequency and vibrational medicine, because it's absorbed through the limbic system, we don't have to bypass or it doesn't have to be broken down by the gut. It doesn't have to be absorbed. It doesn't need to be processed by the liver. And as a result, there's no contraindications between homeopathic medicine and pharmaceutical medicine, on long-term pharmaceutical medicine, and those who are on chemotherapy, blood thinners, and long-term prescriptions such as blood pressure and cholesterol medication. It also can be used by people who are on mental and emotional stabilizers that are pharmaceuticals with great responses. So there's a lot of freedom for us to play around, where naturopathic medicine and Chinese medicine are often fearful and criticized by the pharmaceutical Western medical model. Homeopathic medicines, as I described before, they don't actually heal, but instead remove the thing that prevents the vital force from creating equilibrium in the patient. So we call this an obstacle to cure, a never well since. And you may have heard this within your own patients' cases as you're studying initial since my mother died. I've never been well since that car accident. I've never been well since I started that HRT medication. I've never been well since that concussion. Because we are always looking at the symptoms as a manifestation of the imbalance of the person and the vital force being inactive, we go underneath that and we look for causation. This is why it's very deep medicine. It's holistic medicine because it works on the mind, the body, and the cells. And we go straight to the causation of the problem. And we see that a healthy vital force equals good health, because then we have the ability to activate our own innate healing response and heal ourselves. And this is greatly important when we're talking about an epidemic such as COVID-19. We see that the people who are most high risk, who are more immunocompromised, who have more pharmaceuticals in their body, who have had more years of suppressive allopathic medication, have a resistance to be able to heal themselves and get better without assistance. And whereas our patients who have a good general health, who have an active vital force, who have a strength in their immune system, who have the ability to ward off bugs and parasites and bacteria and viruses themselves, have a much faster recovery. And this is because their vital force is healthy and clean. Homeopathic medicines are potentized vibrational energetic substances that can be made from minerals, metals, herbs, flowers, animals, bacteria, viruses, and diseases. So as I mentioned before, it's the potentized medicine, the vibrational form that is created by diluting the crude substance down and then succussing it, which is the process of the molecular change through banging on a hard book, or in homeopathic dispensaries all around the world, it's done by machine. So this process of succussion is the storage of the vibrational and energetic imprint of the original substance from which the medicine is made, and it then binds itself to the water molecule that then is transferred to the patient once it hits the tongue. So what's interesting here is the bacteria, the viruses, and the diseases, and this is where the epidemical medicines and the homeoprophylaxis principles came from. And Hahnemann played a lot around with this because he was in the time where cholera was really big, gonorrhea was very big, syphilis was very big, TB was very big. So he had those crude sputums, and he had the discharges from those very real venereal diseases. And he created homeopathic potentized medicines from these original substances. These are actually banned. Some of these are banned in some countries around the world. For example, Australia does not allow us to prescribe homeopathic opium, even though it is in its vibrational form very, very good for people who have opioid addiction and who have a lot of hallucinations and symptoms that you experience if you do take opiates and heroin and those kind of addictive substances. So a lot of this research that was done was by Hahnemann in its application to epidemic diseases around 200 years ago. Fortunately, there are plenty of materials that we can draw from to read these provings, which is where our application of this knowledge comes as homeopaths now in 2020. As we go back to those books, we see what Hahnemann did, we see those provings, and then collectively we're sharing case knowledge from the patients that we are seeing and the symptom totality that's being presented by this COVID-19, and then we can apply those same principles. Homeopathy is the world's fastest growing alternative system of medicine, and there's been a lot of publicity the last few days about Prince Charles and how that's been applying homeopathy. There are currently 5 homeopathic hospitals. India has 165 homeopathic medical colleges, and more than 30% of the government has registered homeopathic doctors who see between 100 and 200 patients a day. And I can testimony to that, that my time in India was working with patient numbers like that. You have about 3 to 4 minutes to get a diagnosis and a remedy. I want to spend some time on miasms. This is another piece of homeopathic research that Hahnemann discovered based on these contagious diseases we were talking about before. So syphilitic miasm comes from the syphilis, tubercular comes from TB, psychosis came from syphilis, and sora came from the reactivity and the itch that came from crabs. So the idea is that a homeopathic patient comes to us, we take a case, we take all of their medical history and we place them in this graph to work out how responsive the vital force is. Now, this is important specifically when it comes to COVID-19 because we're seeing a lot of the people who are dying from COVID have the syphilitic miasm active. So this is our homeopathic application of epigenetics, the idea that we are the product of our family history, our mothers and our fathers' predispositions. And those miasms are active, which means that we have that expression of disease in our DNA from generation and generation. It's passed down from these initial diseases back when. So people who are dying from COVID-19 are already in this syphilitic miasm. They often have deterioration. They have complicated medical history. They often have one, if not many, chronic disease diagnosis. And so what we see clinically is they don't die from COVID. They die with COVID because the vital force is already so compromised. You'll notice that birth is on the left-hand side, death is on the right. And that is because based on our vital forces expression, the further we get to the right, the more resistance and the less integrity that is in that vital force to throw off the symptoms. So what we're seeing is, and what I'm seeing clinically with my COVID patients, is that the ones who come to me with an active psoriatic miasm, they call me, they say, I've got the dry cough, I've had the high fever, and 2 or 3 remedy doses, and they already throw the symptoms. It's all resolved because the vital force is so responsive. Most of my patients who are in psychosis and tubercular have a clinical lifespan of between 5 and 7 days, but it will resolve with homeopathic medicine because this vital force is activated and we will see a change in the vital force in kicking off those symptoms. The ones who are in tubercular and syphilitic are the ones that you're seeing and hearing about who are at these centres and who are in ICU and who are in hospital for long periods of time. And that's because the homeopathic miasm expression is already so compromised and the vital force is already so underactive that it requires so much more energy and additional assistance systemically and on an organ level to actually throw those symptoms off. So this is important to note when it comes to, if I'm treating a COVID patient, I've got to plot where they are to know my dosage of my remedies, how much frequency and potency and how much of a repetition I'm going to need to dose those remedies, because the further we are to the right, the more doses that we need to create a remedy response, almost like needing to nudge the vital force to say, come on, I need you to speed up, I need you to start working. Whereas those who are in sora take 2 or 3 doses, the vital force kicks in, it resolves, and then the symptoms disappear. So let's talk about the historical application of homoprophylaxis. So typhus is a rash, it's a disease that includes rash, headache, fever, and delirium. And in 1813 in Leipzig, they used the homeopathic nosode, which is the homeopathic preparation of typhoid. And they saw, and Hahnemann treated 180 cases where only 2 died, whereas the allopathic mortality rate of treatment was higher than 30%. This is just some old cases and applications for you. The next one is diphtheria, and diphtheria is a bacterial infection that has difficulty breathing, paralysis, and death. And it's written about in Kent's Lectures of Homeopathic Philosophy and also in Nash in Homeopathic Therapeutics that Dr. Bird in 1879 treated homeopathically, and the mortality rate was only 6%, whereas at the time the allopathic treatment rate was 17%. Similarly, records from Broome County in New York from 1862 to 64 saw that the homeopathic mortality rate was only 16% compared to 83% of patients that were treated with allopathic medicine. So at the time, these were the nosodes, the homeopathic preparation of the diphtheria that was actually used as the treatment. Why? Because that is the remedy that has the most alignment to the disease. So the vibrational signature is the same, but they did not use that in crude form. They diluted it down. They made it into a potentized medicine through the process of dilution and succussion. And they would do that as a homeoprophylaxis treatment in prevention. For smallpox, Dr. Ruth in London, who was one of the biggest skeptics at the time from around 1840 to 1870, he wrote a lot of papers denouncing homeopathy, and he published in his Fallacies of Homeopathy that despite his skeptical attitude towards homeopathy, he could not deny that the mortality rate with homeopathic treatment was less than the allopathic, sitting at 18.5 instead of 33 in the epidemic of smallpox. Smallpox is something that we don't see used with conventional immunization. It's something that's been eradicated, but it's one of the best published homeoprophylaxis applications in all of the historic provings and all of Kent's lectures, because it was such a pandemic at the time. They didn't have the beginnings of the vaccine, but homeoprophylaxis was widely used. For dysentery, and this is what I've used a lot in my clinical application in India. I've had many times there where I've had outbreaks of dysentery with bloody diarrhea, fever, and cramps. The allopathic mortality rate was 22, whereas with homeoprophylaxis, the rate was only 3%. And we would do this through, I had 11 villages. There was a total of 30,000 people that were in treatment at one time with a dysentery outbreak, and those 30,000 people we would dose with the homeoprophylaxis, and the statistics were exceptional in terms of controlling and managing an outbreak. For scarlet fever, for those that are not familiar, is a bright red rash with a sore throat and high fever, and Hahnemann gave belladonna, which is prepared from deadly nightshade, as the homeoprophylaxis. 1,646 children were given it, and only 123 developed scarlet fever, whereas those who were not given belladonna had a 90% infection rate. So they're really great statistics. For cholera, which is watery diarrhea from contaminated food and water, I've also treated cholera epidemics in India with great success, using the same preparations and same nosode as Dr. Hahnemann, but this time it was Bonninghauser for this particular proving that I've chosen to share. In the 1949 epidemic, the homeopathic hospital mortality rate with the HP nosode was only 16% compared to allopathic hospitals, which was 90%. So that's pretty impressive. So let's talk specifically about COVID and how it's presenting. Now, most of my patients are coming to me, and I just want to put out there that this is not a claim. I can't legally say that I treat or prevent or claim to cure, but my language is that I treat it because I'm treating the symptom totality of my patients. And most of my patients are presenting with symptoms of the high fever and the dry cough that persists for 1 or 2 days with a stagnant sore throat. That's most of the clinical presentation that I'm seeing, with the fatigue and the irritability. And if that is not being treated in the first 2 to 3 days, it's then moving on to a deterioration of symptoms of the shortness of breath, the fluid on the lungs, more of the fever, systemic congestion, aches and pains, and then the systemic involvement of the headache and the diarrhea. So this is what we know from the World Health Organization about its clinical representation. Now, if you remember going back to that miasm slide, For those patients who are in that first miasm called SORA, they often don't get to the nasal congestion, the congestion on the lungs, the headaches and the aches and pains, because they will throw off the symptoms and self-resolve through the vital force being activated, often with 1 or 2 doses of medicines, because their vital force is stronger because they're in SORA. I'm seeing those patients who have an active miasm that is psychotic and tubercular go into this secondary progression of the illness, which includes the systemic involvement and then the pleurisy and liquid congestion on the lungs. And to me, that's the most concerning of all of these symptoms, is the shortness of breath and the congestion in the lungs. So the homeopathic medicine that I'm using in my clinic is Medorrhinum. There's a lot of Indian homeopaths that are using camphor, and camphor is working very well for the Indian population because they have another nosode that is particular to the medical history and the epigenetics of the Indian population, called pseudosora, and they're doing very well with camphor. I haven't got any Indian patients at the moment, so I've not been able to trial this within my patients, but similarly to the homeopaths in Europe and other homeopaths in Australia and America, because the majority of my clinic is Caucasian and white, we're seeing more, rather than the Indian descent, we're seeing more of the psychotic miasm being active in these patients, and the HP that's relevant to that is Medorrhinum. So Medorrhinum is a remedy that helps on an antiviral level, and the psychotic miasm is all around congestion and sluggishness. And this is what we're seeing with the vital force / immune system of those people who are getting this virus and this contaminant, is they are stuck in a healing pattern where they can't self-resolve. So as a result of that, being given the Medorrhinum prophylactically as the homeopathic nosode, we're seeing that their symptoms and their vibration frequency is raising. They're moving more towards SORA, which means that their vital force is becoming more responsive, so that if and when they do have the contagious COVID, their body and their vital force is already beginning to respond, move in the correct direction of cure, and be able to throw the symptoms off and activate healing themselves. So Medorrhinum is a remedy that has great heat and soreness around the body. There's a state of collapse, another symptom of that systemic congestion and sluggishness. But there's also a lot of mental symptoms, mental anguish, a lot of anticipation of death, fear of illness, and a lot of lymphatic and systemic congestion. So I'm finding that this remedy, being given as a homeopathic nosode, as with many homeopaths all around the world, are giving this prophylactically as the HP for COVID. I'm seeing great results with people not actually who have been exposed, are not actually taking on the symptoms and not having the infection. The other thing that I'm giving my patients is the homeopathic remedy Aconite. This is important because it's a very strong lung tonic and it's preventative medicine for ear, nose and throat symptoms. Aconite specifically used for people who have a sudden onset of symptoms, which we are seeing with the COVID symptom totality. These people often experience symptoms worse in the evening and when they get out of bed, and they're much better with a window open and from uncovering. There's a lot of lung congestion, ear, nose and throat congestion, and also fever symptoms. And this patient is often very thirsty. So this is working very well for my patients as a preventative tonic, and also for the secondary part of a progression of COVID-19 when there's lung involvement and there's liquid on the lungs. Aconite is a fantastic remedy to draw out and absorb all of that liquid and get it up, be able to expectorate it out. Arsenicum album is another symptom totality remedy that I'm using for the, in brackets, treatment, management of the disease. For COVID-19, where the shortness of breath is aggressive, where they can't lie down, they find it difficult to breathe, they must sit up, where there's a lot of wheezing and whistling in the breath, where there's a lot of asthmatic history in the patient, and when they're unable to spit up the sputum from the liquid in the lungs, and there's great mental anguish and restlessness and fear of illness and death. I'm finding arsenicum's working very well for these patients. And it's drying up all the fluid, it's getting the breathing under control, and we're seeing some great results with patients not being able to, not having to go to medical clinics and get on breathing apparatus. Hepasulf is the last remedy that I'm using for treatment, and this is for that initial stage of that choking, strangling cough. So that's the first stage of this illness with the high fever, and there's just the beginning of the rattling of mucus with more hoarseness and the beginnings of the aches and pains. So I'm seeing good results with Hepasulf as well. So my advice for prevention and treatment is, and of course I don't claim to be able to cure, treat or prevent, but what I'm doing with my patients is Medarinum once a week every Monday, Aconite once a week every Thursday, and that's the homeoprophylaxis and the lung tonic to do the prevention. And then I'm also sending out to my remedies Hepasulf and Arsenicum, and if there are an onset of symptoms, then I'm having a consult with the patient to see which stage of progression of symptom totality, and that is then giving me the information I need to start with which remedies and how often in repetition. Okay, I hope that was valuable. I'll now open up for questions.
Okay, well, while Richard's unmuting folks, Nicole, this is Rob. So, as I understand, if I understand correctly, I have a father up in New York. He's in an isolated place now. He's in a senior living center, so there's no one going in around. Fine, he was tested recently, and my father we're going to deliver food as we speak. So, could we get some of these preventive measures for those folks, for our folks, or for us?
Definitely.
All right.
The way I've done it is I'm sending the medicines out, and I've also done a video that I email out to explain exactly what the medicines are, or how to take them, because a lot of these things can be lost in translation, particularly when we're talking about the elderly and also those who are sick anyway. So yeah, absolutely. You can just send me an email or a text or give me a phone call, and I can get those remedies out to whoever and whatever is needed.
All right. Well, I will do that. I'm in my car now, but I will email you later, and we'll go back and forth that way. But that's, I think, very important. I think a lot of people, that'd be a question they would have. So I thought I'd start with that one. I imagine we have other people interested now, so I'm going to let other people have an opportunity to talk with you.
Thanks, Rob.
Hi, Nicole. My name's Gary. I remember having a wonderful experience with homeopathic remedy when I was feeling very depressed, and the first little, as soon as the opium touched my tongue, my mood lifted for months. It was wonderful. My question for you, however, is about your Wikipedia page. I think we both have poor standing on Wikipedia. You presented some great statistics that tended to be old. How do you understand the current research on homeopathy?
How do I understand it in terms of the skeptics? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, Wikipedia and the medical community is fond of neither your field nor mine.
No, that's right. I just want to say my first comment, Gary, is homeopathy is so fast, and thank you for sharing that. I've broken fevers in the field in India in 3 minutes because homeopathy acts fast. And with mental emotional symptoms, it can lift so quickly. So thank you for drawing that up. It's a difficult time to practice this kind of medicine when Big Pharma has a hold of Facebook, Google, the government, financial institutions. It can very often lead to us feeling like we're alone. And I think this is where professional relationships with people such as yourselves, homeopathic doctors, it's never become more important for us to help each other to educate our patients and to show them through proof. Homeopathy, despite what they say, a patient will see a difference. And I normally start with treating pets and babies because there's no denial that there's any involvement, including the placebo effect, when you stop a cat from sneezing because it has hay fever, or when you stop colic in a baby. You didn't tell the baby that, oh, hey, I'm going to give you this remedy called colosynthis and you're going to stop crying. So oftentimes it's those cases that I draw upon, but I have to tell you, I live a very small life with my practice, and the people who see me have seen me for the last 17 years, and it's word of mouth that's really driven my practice all these years. I've given up trying to write articles, blogs, and do videos on YouTube because I started to receive so much negative feedback, and I was spending all my time working against naysayers instead of what I believe is my calling and my love, which is the application of homeopathic medicine. So I think it's a time where the world's ready for a change. I think we've got to show them change through clinical application. But I think we do have to be careful about how we share that on what platforms, because we don't even stand a chance, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Hi, Nicole. My name is Debbie. I was wondering if you'd be willing to give a little bit of guidance on what potencies you're using and the frequency that you're dosing.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Debbie. So I just want to go back through my slides to this miasm chart again. And this is where this becomes relevant. And you guys will get this, and I'll be talking your language, so it's so much easier with you guys. Because frequency medicine, homeopathic dilution percussion has got to do with the frequency of the patient. And we always have to match the intensity of the symptomatic expression of the patient, and also bring into consideration where they're sitting with a miasm. So those patients that we're talking about who are high risk, immunocompromised, the elderly that have many other systemic congestions, pathologies, and potentially pharmaceutical medicines who sit in the syphilitic miasm, give them a very low dose, because too much can actually throw them into aggravation. Because their expression of the disease is so sluggish and it's so tumultuous with everything else that they're expressing, we only want to give these people a 6C or a 30C. Sora, however, because they've got a very reactive vital force, I will be dosing in anything from 200, 1M and 10M to match the vibrational intensity of that vital force expression, even though it's the symptom totality. So it's hard and fast dosing if you're in Sora, and this is what we see with babies that have raging fevers, who are teething, who have constipation or colic, is we get in there with the correct remedy similimum that matches the totality of symptoms. We go hard and fast every 15 minutes with a 200 or a 1M, and they have very fast resolution. So how that relates specifically to my HP protocol for COVID-19 is because I believe that most of the population that I am treating is in this psychotic miasm where it's very sluggish. Metarhizium is a frequent medicine that does very, very well in 200 potency and frequency. So I'm dosing a 200 of that metarhizium once a week on the Monday. And on the Thursday, as the lung tonic, I'm doing Aconite 10M. And the reason for that is because the expression of COVID is hard and fast for those patients with the onset of the high fever, the lung congestion, and often the mental anguish and the fear and the fright is very high vibrationally. So I'm using a 10M Aconite. For the Hepasolve and the Arsenicum, I'm actually doing multiple potencies in one vial or one bottle, depending whether the patient wants to take it in liquid or pilules. The reason for that is because then I have multiple potencies that are being used for a family that can be sitting in many different places in this miasm chart. That is not the way I prescribe traditionally, but it is something that was suggested through one of the greatest homeopaths, Dana Ullman, in Europe. He said the best way and the most cost-effective way for us to deliver these medicines to the population at this point in time would be to do multiple potencies so that we can create that vibrational distance and hopefully catch more people in different vibrational signatures. So that's not something that I use as a general rule in my practice, but I'm seeing good results with its application. I'm still seeing nice hard and fast results with every 30 minutes to 1 hour dosage. But that's why with the onset of symptoms, I ask that the patient call me directly so I can take a quick 15-minute case over the phone or over Zoom and work out which myasm they are in. And that gives me more accuracy as to how frequent those multiple potencies need to be taken.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Oh,
Nicole, this
hi.
is Tracy. I'm actually a nurse practitioner, and I got into neurofeedback through this group and discovered the world of neurofeedback. And I'm getting certified in functional medicine, but I find this also very fascinating. Are you shipping from Australia, or do we? Because it's obviously not a traditional pharmacy. Do you make these yourself, or how does that work?
Okay, so I'm an American citizen. I now live in Denver, Colorado, and every homeopath has their own dispensary. Having said that, all homeopathic medicines are not created equal. I'm a purist. I'm very Hahnemannian and classical in my approach. That's where the research is. And he used hand-diluted and hand-succussed medicines. And India is the only place that I can source those because the West likes to use machinery. And I just find that the vibrational integrity and the bandwidth of the vibrational frequency is not the same. So it can be very difficult for patients who go to natural grocers or Whole Foods, and they will grab Colosynthus 30 from the shelf, and they will dose their baby that has abdominal colic, and I'll get a phone call that says, hey, you said that 4 doses of this remedy was going to cure it, and it hasn't done anything. And I'll say, okay, let me send you Colosynthus 30 from my dispensary and 3 doses, and it works. And I believe this is the difference between medicines that are made on a black box or in machinery versus hand-succussed. So every homeopath has their own dispensary. So I have a room in my house that I have in my house or in my clinic for the last 17 years. And we take those remedies, we make them up into either liquids. We then prescribe them according to the symptom totality of our patients, and we ship them out to them. So in that way, it's very, very different to pharmaceutical medicine. People don't require a script, don't even require any legalities or understanding. I do like to have my patients have an understanding of homeopathic medicine. I'll often give them 15 minutes of my time just to make sure they know how to apply it, even if they're not my patient. But a lot of people will source medicines from me because they're from India. I do that is I had my homeopathic charity over there for 11 years, which enabled me to get very high levels and mass quantities of Indian and ship them to Australia, and then they just came over with me.
Okay, great. So you're based in Colorado. So say you were saying that you have the homeopathy prevention versus treatment. Do you send it all out at once? Like say somebody's doing something for prevention, but then they get sick. Do you send it out then,
yes,
or do you kind of do it?
So many of my patients are choosing to buy those 4 remedies in a kit at once, and we do a 15-minute consultation. I explain how to use them because they'd rather just have them there and not have to wait for the postage. There's others who are just ordering the prevention to get started, and they have symptoms. They say, hey, can you jump into the and send it immediately. So it's up to you what you'd like to do and how resistant you feel you are to it based on your exposure and your level of concern. But I go to the post office for my patients every day because I consult internationally. I always have parcels from the previous day's consults anyway. So it's just a matter of emailing me, letting me know what you want to do, jumping on a phone call so you understand, or a Zoom to make sure you know what you're doing, and then putting it into the post.
And are you completely okay with us sharing your information, referrals?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the only thing is I've just got to be careful with the words that we use. I'm not treating it. I'm not claiming to cure it. It's just more around that. And the world, as you guys know, because you're neurofeedback practitioners, are not very familiar with vibrational medicine and frequency things. So I just talk about immune support because that seems to be something that mainstream can understand.
Hello, Nicole. Can you hear
Hi.
me? It's Victor McGregor. I've just watched. I know the clock is getting close to the top of the hour.
Hello. Benjamin.
So, yeah, I wanted to. Thank you. Somebody else is talking
You
at
can
the same
find out
time as
too.
me, so I'm going to talk over them. This is Gregor from New York. And
Hi, Victor.
Hi. In Rhinebeck here, we have a classical homeopathy called, I think it's James Whitmont. But I wanted to just let me express my appreciation to you and New Mind for bringing us during this critical time, because so much has to do with timing as to when you do what, and especially when you're under time pressures like this, to be able to try and focus in on what the patient needs at this particular junction. So I was impressed. You see a new patient every 4 minutes. And our insurance company would like to know how to do more of that. But it sounds like you use an intuition of some meta-analysis. And so I'm curious, you combined this with other things. I appreciated you combining this with allopathic medicine, but also I'm interested in what you combined it with in terms of other things we do in neurofeedback, whether it's the hair analysis or the breathing or even you know, I'm into archetypal psychology, and trying to combine these different modalities in a meta-analysis using metaphysics as well as a very strong motivating factor to work with the patient's expectations and engagement.
For sure. If you're familiar with the homeopathic constitution, this has a very big application with such psychology analysis, such as the Enneagram, or the idea that personality types. There's a great correlation between all of those fields of study and orchestration, and understanding what makes a person tick and what intensities do they have, which predispose weaknesses. Are they more likely to be a person who expresses imbalance on a mental and psychology level as anxiety and apprehension and anguish and fear, or is it more depression and melancholy and debilitation? So there's a great alignment with that psychology. I have used and worked with a lot of neurofeedback practitioners, and the consistent results are for patients who are in neurofeedback, they do better on the remedies, and just as equally when they're on remedies and I refer out to neurofeedback, they do better in their neurofeedback. And because you have the capacity for those data points, it's very, the evidence is there. Not only the clinical application and then we see the resolution of symptoms, but we can actually see, you know, what the brain map changed. And we did neurofeedback on its own. And then we saw that we introduced the homeopathic remedy and how things shifted. Similarly, people who use chiropractic and homeopathy alongside is that they will experience the chiropractic adjustments holding longer when they're on the correct indicated homeopathic medicine. So all of those vibrational spheres are a big part of what I do. And I work with a lot of practitioners together in that synergy, working towards those same outcomes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victor.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. We're at the top of the hour, folks. If it's okay with you, Nicole, I'm going to suggest people email to me questions they might have for you, and I will put them all together and send them in an email to you, since there'll probably be duplicate questions. And then we could post those answers on the listserv for people if that works well for you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be with like-minded people.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. We really appreciate it. We did record this. We will post it so people can see your slides. Then I'll get questions to you. I'll wait till the end of the day, and then I'll send you a first batch probably tomorrow morning. And if you would put on your schedule to email me a time where I can meet with you by telephone.
Sounds great.
That works for you.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. Everybody, thank you. We'll see you next Monday at Neuro at Night. Everybody be safe. Everybody be careful. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.